A wealthy Ohio CEO divorces pregnant wife for mistress, then sees her with twins 2 years later. "Hi," Michael said brightly, tugging on David's expensive pants leg. David looked down, irritated at the interruption, and froze mid-sentence. The phone slipped from his suddenly nerveless fingers, clattering to the subway floor. He was staring into his own eyes. Michael had inherited David's distinctive dark eyes, his strong jawline, even the way his left eyebrow quirked slightly upward. "Emma?" David's voice was barely a whisper. "Hello, David," she said quietly. "These are your children, Michael and Grace. They're 2 years old. Welcome to Luxe Love Chronicles with Mr. Wentworth. I'm absolutely thrilled to have you here with me today. We're currently at 26 subscribers, and watching this channel grow means the world to me. Each one of you who takes time to listen to these stories fills my heart with such gratitude." Before we dive into today's story, I want to say a quick prayer for all my beloved subscribers. Heavenly Father, I lift up every person listening to this story today. Bless them with wisdom in their decisions, strength in their challenges, and peace in their hearts. May they find joy in the small moments and courage to pursue what truly matters. Protect their families, guide their steps, and let love be the foundation of everything they build. Amen. Now, let me tell you a story that will challenge everything you think you know about success and what really matters in life. This is the story of David Richardson, a man who built an empire in Ohio but lost his soul, until one subway encounter changed everything forever. If stories of redemption and second chances inspire you, hit that like button now and let me know in the comments what you value most in life. The garage in suburban Cleveland smelled of motor oil and dreams. David Richardson stood surrounded by computer parts and financial projections spread across a card table, his vision burning brighter than the single bare bulb hanging overhead. At 28, he had nothing but ambition and a revolutionary idea for automotive manufacturing software. "You're working too late again," Emma said softly, appearing in the doorway with a steaming cup of coffee. Even in her scrubs after a grueling 12-hour shift at Cleveland General Hospital, she was the most beautiful thing he'd ever seen. "Just a few more hours," David replied, accepting the coffee gratefully. "The Peterson Group wants to see our presentation next week. If we land this contract, Emma, everything changes." Emma wrapped her arms around his shoulders from behind, resting her chin on his head. "I believe in you, David. But remember to take care of yourself too." "What would I do without you?" David turned to kiss her cheek. "When Richardson Industries takes off, I'm going to buy you the biggest house in Hudson. You'll never have to work another double shift again." "I don't need a big house," Emma laughed. "I just need you." But David was already lost in his vision again, sketching out expansion plans that would transform their little startup into a manufacturing empire. Emma squeezed his shoulders once more and headed inside, leaving him to chase his dreams under the flickering garage light. 2 years later, Richardson Industries occupied a gleaming 40-story tower in downtown Cleveland, its golden letters visible from miles away. David, now 30, commanded boardrooms with the same intensity he'd once brought to that cramped garage. But somewhere between the first million and the first billion, the humble man Emma had married began to disappear. "The Tokyo deal is worth $200 million, David said into his phone, pacing behind his executive desk while Emma sat waiting in the leather chair across from him. "I don't care if it's our anniversary dinner, Trevor. This is bigger than—" Emma cleared her throat softly. "Hold on," David said, covering the phone. "What?" "Our reservations are at 7, Emma reminded him gently. She wore a beautiful red dress he bought her, though he couldn't remember when. "It's been 3 months since we've had dinner together. This is important, Emma. The Asian market. And our marriage isn't." The words slipped out before Emma could stop them. David stared at her, the phone still pressed to his ear. For a moment, she saw a flicker of the man who used to bring her flowers just because it was Tuesday. But it vanished as quickly as it had come. "Trevor?" "Yeah, I'm here. Set up the conference call for 8. Emma stood slowly, her heart breaking a little more. "I'll be at Giovanni's if you change your mind." She left David's office without looking back, not seeing the way his shoulders sagged once she was gone. But the Tokyo deal required his attention, and success, David had learned, demanded sacrifices. That was the same week David hired Victoria Sinclair as his executive assistant. Victoria was 26, ambitious, and hungry for the luxury lifestyle that David's wealth could provide. She had graduated summa cum laude from Northwestern's business school and possessed the kind of sharp intelligence that cut through boardroom politics like a knife through silk. "Mr. Richardson," Victoria said, standing in his office doorway with a stack of contracts. "I've reorganized your schedule to maximize efficiency. We can squeeze in 3 more meetings this week if we work through lunch." "Excellent," David replied, impressed by her initiative. "And call me David. We're going to be working closely together." Victoria smiled, a perfect blend of professional and personal that sent an unexpected thrill through David's chest. "Of course, David. Whatever you need." What started as late nights reviewing merger documents slowly evolved into something more dangerous. While Emma worked exhausting shifts at the hospital, David found himself staying later and later at the office, drawn to Victoria's ambition and her obvious admiration for his success. "You're brilliant, you know that," Victoria said one evening as they reviewed the Henderson acquisition papers. The office was empty except for the 2 of them, the city lights twinkling beyond the floor-to-ceiling windows. David looked up from the contracts, meeting her gaze. "It's not brilliance. It's hunger." "I understand hunger," Victoria said softly, moving closer to his desk. "I understand what it takes to build an empire." "Emma doesn't," David said, the words escaping before he could stop them. "She still sees me as the guy in the garage. She doesn't understand that Richardson Industries requires everything from me." "She doesn't deserve you," Victoria whispered, and David felt his carefully constructed walls beginning to crumble. The first kiss happened 3 weeks later, after they'd successfully closed the largest merger in company history. The second kiss led to dinner at the most expensive restaurant in Columbus. By the 3rd month, David was living a double life that would have destroyed him if he'd had any conscience left. While Emma worked double shifts to support what she thought was their shared dream, David was taking Victoria to 5-star restaurants, buying her designer clothes, and promising her a future that belonged to someone else. "When are you going to leave her?" Victoria asked one evening as they lay in the penthouse suite David had rented for their clandestine meetings. "Soon," David replied, though the word tasted like ash in his mouth. "The Henderson merger needs to close first. I can't have the optics of a divorce affecting stock prices." "I'm tired of being your secret, David," Victoria said, tracing patterns on his chest. "I want to be your wife, not your mistress." "You will be," David promised, pushing away the image of Emma waiting for him at home with dinner growing cold on the table. "After the merger closes, everything will be different." But everything changed much sooner than David expected. Emma stared at the pregnancy test in her trembling hands, hardly daring to believe what she was seeing. After 4 years of marriage and 2 devastating miscarriages, the pink lines seemed like a miracle. But this time was different. This time, there were 2 heartbeats. Twins. "Oh my God," she whispered to her reflection in the bathroom mirror. "Twins." She pressed her hand to her still flat stomach, imagining the 2 tiny lives growing inside her. David had always said he wanted children someday, when the company was more stable, when they had more time. But someday had arrived whether they were ready or not. Emma's hand shook as she dialed Dr. Martinez's office. "Cleveland Medical, this is Sarah." "Hi, this is Emma Richardson. I need to schedule an appointment with Dr. Martinez as soon as possible. I'm pregnant." "Congratulations. How exciting. Let me see. We have an opening Friday morning at 9. "Perfect. Thank you." Emma hung up the phone and looked at the pregnancy test again, as if the pink lines might have changed in the last 30 seconds. But they were still there, solid and undeniable. She was going to be a mother. David was going to be a father. She had to tell him. Emma practically flew to Richardson Industries, her heart pounding with excitement. The security guard, recognizing her as the CEO's wife, waved her through without question. The elevator ride to the 40th floor felt endless, but finally the doors opened onto David's executive suite. "Mrs. Richardson." David's secretary looked surprised. "I didn't know you were coming in today." "Mr. Richardson is in his office, but he's on an important call with—" "That's okay, Janet. I'll wait." But as Emma approached David's office, she heard voices through the partially open door. David's deep laugh, followed by a woman's giggle she didn't recognize. Emma's footsteps slowed. Something in the tone of their conversation made her blood run cold. "When are you going to leave her?" The woman's voice was crystal clear through the crack in the door. "I'm tired of sneaking around, David. I want to be your wife, not your secret." Emma's hand instinctively moved to her still flat stomach where two tiny lies were growing. The positive pregnancy test felt like it was burning a hole in her purse. "Soon, baby," David replied, his voice tender in a way Emma hadn't heard in months. "The board meeting next month will secure the Henderson merger. Once that's done, I won't need to worry about the optics of a divorce affecting stock prices." Emma backed away from the door, her heart shattering with each step. She made it to the elevator before the tears started, and by the time she reached the parking garage, she was sobbing so hard she could barely see. David was having an affair. Not only that, but he was planning to divorce her. And now she was carrying his children he would probably see as nothing more than complications to his perfectly planned betrayal. Emma sat in her car for an hour, crying until she had no tears left. When she finally drove home to their sprawling estate in Hudson, she felt like a stranger in her own life. The mansion that had once represented their success now felt like a mausoleum of broken dreams. She waited for David to come home, sitting at their kitchen island with the pregnancy test beside her like evidence of a crime. When he finally arrived at nearly midnight, smelling like expensive perfume and wine, Emma felt her heart break all over again. "We need to talk," she said quietly. David barely glanced at her, loosening his tie as he headed toward the refrigerator. "Can it wait? I have the Henderson presentation tomorrow." "I'm pregnant," Emma said. "With twins." David froze, his hand on the refrigerator handle. For a moment, Emma saw a flicker of the man she'd married, surprise, maybe even joy. But it disappeared as quickly as it had come. "Are you sure?" he asked, his voice flat. "I took 3 tests. I have a doctor's appointment scheduled for Friday." Emma's voice broke slightly. "David, we're going to have twins. Isn't this wonderful?" Instead of the celebration she'd imagined, David ran his hands through his hair and turned away from her. "The timing is terrible, Emma. The merger, the expansion into Asian markets. I can't have distractions right now." "Distractions?" Emma stood up, the pregnancy test falling to the floor. "These are our children, David. The children we've been trying to have for years." "That was before," David snapped. "Before Richardson Industries became what it is. Before I had responsibilities to shareholders, to employees, to your mistress." Emma's voice was barely a whisper. David's face went white. "What are you talking about?" "Victoria Sinclair. I heard you today, David. I heard everything." For a moment, neither of them spoke. The silence stretched between them like a chasm, filled with the weight of betrayal and broken promises. "I want a divorce," David said finally. Emma felt the world tilt beneath her feet. "What? You heard me. I want a divorce. Victoria and we're getting married after the Henderson merger closes. I'm carrying your children." Emma's voice rose to a scream. "You're twins, David. How can you?" "I'll make sure you're taken care of financially," David interrupted, his voice cold and businesslike. "But I can't do this anymore, Emma. I can't pretend to be someone I'm not." "And who are you?" Emma asked, tears streaming down her face. "I'm a man who built an empire. And empires require sacrifices." The words hit Emma like physical blows. This wasn't the man who had held her during their miscarriages, who had promised to love her forever. This was a stranger wearing her husband's face. "Get out," she whispered. "Emma, get out," she screamed. "Get out of my house and go to your mistress. But don't you dare pretend this is about business or responsibility. This is about you choosing wealth over love, success over family. And you'll regret it for the rest of your life." David left without another word, and Emma sank to the kitchen floor, sobbing until her chest ached. The pregnancy test lay beside her, its pink lines a promise of life in the middle of so much death. The divorce proceedings were swift and brutal. David's team of high-powered attorneys made sure the settlement was generous enough to avoid bad publicity, but structured in a way that protected his assets. Emma, overwhelmed by pregnancy hormones and heartbreak, simply wanted it to be over. Within 6 weeks, she had moved out of their Hudson mansion and into a modest 2-bedroom apartment in Lakewood, a working-class suburb of Cleveland. The luxury she'd grown accustomed to disappeared overnight. No more housekeeper, no more luxury cars, no more designer clothes. Just Emma, her nursing salary, and 2 babies growing inside her. David married Victoria in a lavish ceremony at the Ritz-Carlton in downtown Cleveland. The society pages called it the wedding of the century, featuring photos of the happy couple surrounded by Ohio's political and business elite. Emma saw the pictures while waiting for a prenatal appointment and threw the magazine in the trash, unable to look at the man who had once promised her forever, now promising the same words to someone else. The twins, a boy and a girl she named Michael and Grace, were born on a snowy February morning. Emma labored for 18 hours at Cleveland General, the same hospital where she worked, surrounded by colleagues instead of family. There were no congratulatory flowers from her ex-husband, no phone calls, no acknowledgement that his children had entered the world. David was in Tokyo that week, expanding Richardson Industries into the Japanese market. When his assistant mentioned that his ex-wife had given birth, he simply nodded and continued reviewing quarterly projections. "Sir," the assistant pressed. "She had twins. A boy and a girl." "I heard you," David said without looking up from his reports. "File the information with legal. They'll need it for the child support calculations." That was all. 2 lives had entered the world carrying half his DNA, and David Richardson treated it like a line item in a business ledger. For 2 years, Emma raised the twins alone. She worked long shifts at the hospital, relying on her neighbor Mrs. Patterson to babysit when she couldn't afford professional childcare. Every morning, she looked at Michael's dark eyes, so like his father's, and Grace's determined chin, and wondered how David could have walked away from such perfect children. "Mama, why don't I have a daddy?" Grace asked one evening as Emma tucked her into bed. Emma's heart clenched. "You do have a daddy, sweetheart. He lives far away. Will I ever meet him?" Emma kissed her daughter's forehead, breathing in the sweet scent of children's shampoo. "Maybe someday, baby. Maybe someday." But Emma didn't believe her own words. David had made his choice crystal clear. Richardson Industries continued to dominate the business news, new acquisitions, record profits, expansion into European markets. David's photo appeared regularly in Ohio Business Weekly, always with Victoria by his side at charity galas and corporate events. If this story is touching your heart so far, please hit that share button and pass it along to someone who needs to hear about second chances. Emma never tried to contact David. Her pride wouldn't allow it. And besides, what would be the point? He had chosen his empire over his family, success over love. The twins were better off without a father who saw them as distractions from his quarterly projections. But success, Emma learned from reading between the lines of gossip columns, wasn't the same as happiness. There were whispers about David's drinking, about Victoria's increasingly frequent business trips to New York and Los Angeles, about tension in the Richardson marriage. Not that Emma took any satisfaction in his troubles. She was too busy trying to survive, working double shifts to pay rent on their modest apartment, while raising 2 toddlers who deserved so much more than she could give them. The twins never asked about their father after that one conversation with Grace. They were too young to understand that other children had daddies who came home from work, who read bedtime stories, who pushed them on swings at the park. To them, their world was complete with just mommy, even if mommy sometimes cried quietly after they were asleep. But fate, Emma would learn, has a way of bringing people back together when they least expect it. 2 years after his wedding to Victoria, David Richardson stood at the floor-to-ceiling windows of his office, staring out at the Cleveland skyline. Richardson Industries was more successful than ever, with quarterly profits exceeding all projections. The Tokyo expansion had tripled their Asian market share, the European acquisitions were performing beyond expectations, and the board had just approved his most ambitious venture yet, a manufacturing plant in Mumbai that would employ 10,000 people. By every measurable standard, David had achieved everything he dreamed of in that cramped garage 15 years ago. So why did he feel so empty? "David, we need to talk." Victoria's voice cut through his contemplation like ice. He turned to find his wife standing in the doorway of his office, designer handbag clutched in her manicured hands. Even at 31, Victoria was stunning, the kind of woman who turned heads at every charity gala and business dinner. But there was something different about her today, a hardness in her eyes that made David's stomach clench. "What's wrong?" he asked, though part of him already knew. Victoria closed the office door behind her and walked to his desk, her heels clicking sharply against the marble floor. "I'm leaving you, David." The words hit him like a physical blow. "What are you talking about?" "I'm filing for divorce. My attorney will contact yours by the end of the week." David stared at her, searching for any sign that this was some kind of joke. But Victoria's face was as cold as winter steel. "Why?" he managed to ask. Victoria laughed, but there was no humor in it. "You really don't know, do you? You're so consumed with building your empire that you've forgotten how to be human." "That's not true. Everything I've done has been for us, for our future." "No, David. Everything you've done has been for your ego." Victoria's voice rose slightly. "When was the last time we had dinner together? When was the last time you asked me about my day, or held me without checking your phone, or made me feel like I mattered more than your quarterly projections?" David opened his mouth to respond, but no words came. He couldn't remember. "You want to know the truth?" Victoria continued, her composure finally cracking. "I've been having an affair with Marcus Chin from the Singapore office for the past 8 months. He's being transferred back to California, and I'm going with him." The confession hit David like a sledgehammer to the chest. "Victoria, don't look so shocked. You taught me well, David. You showed me exactly how a successful person justifies betrayal. You just called it business." Victoria turned toward the door, then paused. "You know what's really pathetic? You had everything with Emma. A woman who loved you unconditionally, who believed in your dreams before you had a dime to your name. And you threw it all away for what? Stock options? Board approval? A name on a building?" "Emma and I weren't compatible anymore," David said weakly. "She didn't understand what it took to build Richardson Industries." "No, David. She understood perfectly. She just understood that there were more important things than buildings and bank accounts. Like love. Like family. Like the children you abandoned." Victoria's words cut deeper than any business rival ever could. "You don't know anything about my relationship with Emma. I know you have twins you've never met. 2-year-old children who don't even know their father's name." Victoria's voice turned venomous. "How does it feel, David? How does it feel to be exactly like your father?" David's blood turned to ice. His father had abandoned their family when David was 7, leaving his mother to raise 3 children alone while chasing get-rich-quick schemes across the country. David had sworn he would never be that man. "I'm nothing like him," David whispered. "Keep telling yourself that," Victoria said, opening the door. "Maybe someday you'll believe it." She left without another word, leaving David alone in his office empire, surrounded by the trappings of success and drowning in the silence of his own making. That night, David went home to their penthouse in downtown Cleveland, 5,000 square feet of luxury that felt as empty as a tomb. He poured himself 3 fingers of 25-year-old scotch and sat in his leather chair, staring at the city lights through floor-to-ceiling windows. For the first time in years, David allowed himself to think about Emma. Really think about her, not just the convenient narrative he'd constructed to justify his betrayal. He remembered the way she used to bring him coffee in that cramped garage, how she believed in his dreams even when he couldn't pay the electric bill. He remembered her gentle hands caring for patients at the hospital, the way she'd light up when he brought her flowers for no reason at all. He remembered the last night they'd spent together as a married couple, when she'd told him about the twins. The look of pure joy on her face, the way her hand had moved protectively to her stomach. And he remembered his own cold response, the way he'd crushed her dreams to protect his own ambitions. David finished his scotch and poured another. And another. By the time he passed out in his chair, the bottle was empty and his cheeks were wet with tears he didn't remember shedding. For the next 3 weeks, David threw himself into work with even more intensity than before, as if quarterly projections could fill the gaping hole Victoria's departure had left in his chest. But every night, he went home to that empty penthouse and drank until the pain became manageable. His employees began to whisper about his behavior. David Richardson, once known for his laser focus and meticulous attention to detail, was making uncharacteristic mistakes. He snapped at board members, forgot important meetings, and showed up to a client presentation still wearing yesterday's clothes. "Sir." His new assistant, a young man named James who replaced Victoria, knocked hesitantly on his office door. "Mr. Hartwell from the Mumbai project is online too." "Tell him I'm busy," David mumbled, not looking up from the financial reports he'd been staring at for the past hour without reading. "He says it's urgent, sir. Something about the environmental impact study." David finally looked up, his eyes bloodshot from another sleepless night. "Fine. Put him through." But as David reached for the phone, his hand knocked over a framed photo on his desk, his wedding picture with Victoria. The glass cracked down the middle, dividing their faces in two. David stared at the broken photo for a long moment, then swept it into his trash can. As he did, his eye caught something else on his desk, a stack of legal documents from his divorce attorney. Child support calculations. Court-mandated financial obligations to Emma Richardson. Emma, the mother of his children. His children. David's hand shook as he picked up the documents. Michael Richardson and Grace Richardson. 2 years and 3 months old. Living at 2847 Lakewood Avenue, Cleveland, Ohio. For the first time in over 2 years, David thought about his children as real people rather than legal obligations. Did they look like him? Like Emma? Could they walk yet? Talk? Did they know they had a father? David grabbed his coat and headed for the elevator, ignoring James's protest about the Mumbai call. He had to see his children. He had to see Emma. The drive to Lakewood took 30 minutes through Cleveland traffic, but it felt like hours. David had never been to this part of the city, working-class neighborhoods with small houses and chain-link fences. It was a world away from the luxury estates of Hudson or the downtown penthouse he now called home. Emma's apartment building was a modest 2-story structure with faded brick siding and a small playground in the courtyard. David sat in his Mercedes for 20 minutes, working up the courage to get out. What would he say? How could he possibly explain 2 years of absence? But before he could decide, he saw her. Emma emerged from the building carrying a laundry basket, looking exactly as beautiful as he remembered, but somehow different. Stronger. She wore simple jeans and a sweater, her hair pulled back in a ponytail, but there was a quiet confidence about her that took David's breath away. Behind her came 2 small figures, a boy and a girl, both with dark hair and familiar features that made David's heart stop. His children. The boy, Michael, was laughing at something his sister had said, his face bright with joy. Grace held Emma's hand, chattering away in the rapid-fire manner of a 2-year-old. They looked healthy, happy, loved. David watched from his car as Emma loaded the children into an old Honda Civic that had seen better days. She buckled them into car seats with practiced efficiency, kissing each of their foreheads before closing the door. As Emma walked around to the driver's side, she glanced in David's direction. For just a moment, their eyes met across the parking lot. Emma's face went pale, but she didn't stop walking. She got into her car and drove away without acknowledgement, leaving David sitting alone in his luxury sedan feeling like the poorest man in Ohio. That night, David couldn't sleep. He kept thinking about Grace's laugh, about the way Michael had skipped alongside Emma, about the worn Honda and the modest apartment building. His children were living in near poverty while he owned 3 homes and a yacht he'd used exactly twice. David spent the next week having Emma and the twins followed by a private investigator, not to intrude on their lives, but to understand them. The reports painted a picture that shattered what remained of David's carefully constructed justifications. Emma worked 50-hour weeks at Cleveland General, often picking up extra shifts to make ends meet. She relied on an elderly neighbor to watch the twins when her schedule conflicted with daycare hours. Michael had been asking for a bicycle for months, but Emma couldn't afford one. Grace needed new winter clothes, but Emma kept putting off the expense. Meanwhile, David had spent more on his wine collection than Emma made in a year. The investigator's final report included photos that brought David to his knees. Emma reading bedtime stories to the twins in their small shared bedroom. Michael and Grace playing in the courtyard playground while Emma watched from a bench, her scrub suggesting she'd just gotten off a shift. The 3 of them at a free community event, laughing together like they were the richest family in the world. David stared at those photos until his eyes burned. His children were growing up without him, and Emma was raising them alone with a strength and grace that humbled him completely. He had to make this right. Somehow, he had to find a way back to the family he'd thrown away. David's opportunity came 3 weeks later, though not in any way he could have planned. He was returning from a disastrous board meeting where 3 major investors had expressed concerns about his recent performance. The Mumbai project was behind schedule, The Singapore merger was stalling, and whispers about his personal problems were affecting stock prices. David's empire, built over 15 years of ruthless ambition, was beginning to show cracks. Instead of taking his usual car service, David decided to walk. He needed air, space to think. But as he wandered through downtown Cleveland, rain began to fall, not the gentle spring shower the weather forecast had predicted, but a torrential downpour that soaked through his $1,000 suit in minutes. David ducked into the nearest subway station, shaking water from his hair and cursing his decision to walk. The platform was crowded with afternoon commuters, all equally surprised by the sudden storm. David found a spot near a pillar and pulled out his phone to call his driver. That's when he heard it, a child's laughter that made his heart skip a beat. David looked up from his phone to see Emma standing 20 feet away, holding the hands of two small children who were giggling at something one of them had said. Even in the harsh fluorescent light of the subway station, Emma looked radiant. But it was the children who captured David's attention. Michael and Grace had grown in the weeks since David had seen them in the parking lot. They were taller, their faces more defined, their personalities more distinct. Michael bounced on his toes with restless energy while Grace pressed close to Emma's side, taking in the crowd with curious eyes. David's chest tightened as he watched them. His children, his family, standing so close he could reach out and touch them, but separated by a chasm of his own making. The train arrived with a screech of brakes and a blast of warm air. Emma guided the twins toward the open doors, but the crowd pressed forward all at once. In the confusion, Michael broke free from Emma's grasp and stumbled backward, bumping directly into David's legs. "Hi," Michael said brightly, looking up at the tall stranger who had steadied him. David looked down, and time stopped. He was staring into his own eyes. Michael had inherited David's distinctive dark eyes, his strong jawline, even the way his left eyebrow quirked slightly upward. But there was something else there too, Emma's gentle spirit, her warmth, her capacity for joy. "Michael." Emma's voice cut through the crowd noise. She pushed through the other passengers, reaching for her son. "I'm sorry, he got away from me." Emma's words died as she looked up and recognized the man her son was talking to. Her face went white, then red, then white again. For a moment, neither of them could speak. "Emma," David managed to whisper. The phone slipped from his suddenly nerveless fingers, clattering to the subway floor. "Hello, David," Emma said quietly, pulling Michael protectively against her side. "These are your children, Michael and Grace. They're 2 years old." Grace peered around Emma's leg, studying David with the same dark eyes that Michael had inherited. "Mama, who is this man?" Emma's jaw tightened. For a moment, David thought she might lie, might protect the twins from the painful truth of who their father was. But Emma had never been one to run from difficult conversations. "This is your daddy, sweetheart," Emma said softly. "The one who lives far away." Michael's face lit up with excitement. "You're my daddy? Really?" David felt his knees go weak. "Yes," he whispered. "I'm your daddy." The train doors began to close, but nobody moved. Other passengers pushed past them, muttering about people blocking the exit, but David barely noticed. He was completely focused on the little boy who was looking at him with wonder and the little girl who was still hiding behind Emma's leg. "Why don't you live with us?" Michael asked with the brutal honesty of a 2-year-old. David opened his mouth, but no words came. How could he explain to a child that he'd chosen board meetings over bedtime stories, quarterly profits over quiet moments? How could he tell his son that he'd been too selfish and blind to see what truly mattered? "Sometimes," Emma said carefully, "daddies and mommies live in different places. But that doesn't mean they don't love their children." David looked at Emma with grateful amazement. Even now, even after everything he'd done to her, she was protecting him. She was giving him grace he didn't deserve. "Do you love us?" Grace asked, stepping out from behind Emma to study David more closely. The question hit David like a physical blow. "Do you love us?" Such a simple question from such a small person, but it contained the weight of 2 years of abandonment, of choices made and opportunities lost. "Yes," David said, his voice breaking. "I love you more than you'll ever know." And in that moment, standing in a crowded subway station with his broken phone at his feet and his expensive suit dripping water, David Richardson finally understood what Victoria had meant. He had spent 15 years building an empire, but he had never learned how to build a family. Michael stepped forward and took David's hand. His small fingers were warm and trusting, and David felt something crack open inside his chest. "Will you come home with us?" Michael asked. David looked at Emma, searching her face for any sign of what she was thinking. Her expression was guarded, protective, but underneath he saw something that gave him hope. Not forgiveness, not yet, but maybe the possibility of forgiveness. "That's up to your mother," David said quietly. Emma studied him for a long moment. The years had changed her, David realized. The gentle girl he'd married had become a strong woman, shaped by hardship and single parenthood into someone formidable. But her eyes, those beautiful, kind eyes, were still the same. "One cup of coffee," Emma said finally. "That's all." The coffee shop near Emma's apartment was nothing like the places David usually frequented. No artisanal pastries or imported beans, just simple coffee served in plain white mugs. But as he sat across from Emma in a cracked vinyl booth, watching Michael and Grace share a chocolate chip cookie at the counter, David thought it was the most beautiful place he'd ever been. "They don't know," Emma said quietly, breaking the silence that had stretched between them. "About the divorce, about why you left. They just know that some kids have daddies who live with them and some don't." David nodded, not trusting his voice. Michael was trying to break the cookie exactly in half, his tongue sticking out in concentration. Grace was giving him patient instructions, her small hands guiding his. "They're incredible," David managed to say. "They are," Emma agreed. "Michael is going to be an engineer, I think. He builds towers out of everything, blocks, books, cereal boxes. And Grace is our little caretaker. She takes care of everyone, even me when I'm tired after work." "Like their mother," David said softly. Emma's cheeks flushed slightly. "They're good kids. They deserve better than," she gestured vaguely, encompassing their modest surroundings. "Than what I've given them," David finished. "I wasn't going to say that, but it's true." David leaned forward, his eyes intense. "Emma, I've been such a fool. These past 2 years, everything I thought I wanted, everything I thought I needed, none of it matters. Not the company, not the money, not the recognition. None of it." Emma studied his face carefully. "What happened, David?" "You look," she searched for the right word. "Broken." David laughed, but there was no humor in it. "Victoria left me. She's filing for divorce." "I'm sorry," Emma said, and David could tell she meant it. Even after everything, Emma's heart was still big enough to feel sympathy for his pain. "Don't be. She was right to leave. I was a terrible husband to her, just like I was to you." David ran his hands through his hair. "She told me I was just like my father, and she was right. I abandoned my family for the promise of something better, something bigger. And now I have everything I thought I wanted, and I've never been more miserable." Michael ran over to their table, cookie crumbs on his shirt. "Daddy, Grace says you're really tall. Are you the tallest person in the world?" David smiled, the first genuine smile he'd felt in months. "No, buddy. There are lots of people taller than me. But you're taller than Mama," Michael pointed out. "Yes, I'm taller than Mama." Michael nodded sagely, as if this confirmed something important. Then he climbed into the booth next to David, settling against his side with the casual affection that only children possess. David's breath caught. His son, was cuddled against him, warm and trusting and perfect. David wrapped his arm around Michael's small shoulders, fighting back tears. Grace approached more cautiously, standing beside Emma's side of the booth. "Mama, can Daddy read us a story?" Emma looked at David, something shifting in her expression. "We should probably head home soon. It's almost bedtime." "Please," Michael asked, looking up at David with those familiar dark eyes. "Will you read us a story, Daddy?" David looked at Emma pleadingly. "Just one story." Emma hesitated, then nodded. "One story." The walk to Emma's apartment took 10 minutes, but it was the most meaningful 10 minutes of David's life. Grace held Emma's hand on one side and David's on the other, chattering about her favorite books. Michael ran ahead, then circled back to grab David's free hand, as if he was afraid his father might disappear. Emma's apartment was small but warm, filled with children's artwork and family photos. David noticed that none of the pictures included him. He had erased himself from their family narrative completely. But there were photos of the twins at every stage of their young lives, documented with the loving attention of a mother who treasured every moment. "This is our home," Grace announced proudly, giving David a tour. "This is the kitchen where Mama makes pancakes. This is the living room where we watch movies. And this is our room." The twins' bedroom was tiny, with twin beds separated by a small nightstand. But the walls were covered with colorful drawings and photos, and stuffed animals were arranged carefully on each pillow. "I sleep on this side," Michael said, bouncing on his bed. "And Grace sleeps there. Sometimes when it thunders, I sleep in Mama's bed, but Grace is brave and stays here." "I'm not that brave," Grace said shyly. "Sometimes I get scared too." David sat on the edge of Michael's bed, and both children climbed up beside him. Emma handed him a well-worn copy of Goodnight Moon, and David opened to the first page. His hands were shaking so badly he could barely hold the book. "In the great green room," David began, his voice rough with emotion. There was a telephone. The twins chorused, clearly familiar with the story. David continued reading, and with each page, he felt something inside him healing. These beautiful children, his children, pressed against his sides, their sleepy voices joining in at the familiar parts. This was what mattered. This was what he'd been searching for in boardrooms and bank accounts and business deals. This was love. When the story ended, David tucked both children into their beds, kissing their foreheads the way he'd watched Emma do in those investigators' photos. Grace fell asleep almost immediately, but Michael grabbed David's hand as he started to leave. "Daddy," Michael whispered, "will you come back tomorrow?" David looked at Emma, who was standing in the doorway watching them. Her expression was unreadable, but there were tears in her eyes. "I hope so, buddy," David whispered back. "I really hope so." After the children were asleep, David and Emma sat in her small living room nursing cups of tea. The silence between them was heavy with 2 years of hurt and betrayal, but also with something else, the possibility of healing. "They're amazing, Emma," David said finally. "You've done an incredible job raising them." "I had help," Emma replied. "Mrs. Patterson next door watches them when I work late shifts. The nurses at the hospital have become like family. It takes a village, you know?" David nodded, though he didn't really know. He'd never needed a village. He'd had money to solve every problem, staff to handle every inconvenience. But Emma had built something more valuable than wealth. She'd built a community. "I've been such an idiot," David said quietly. "All these years, I thought success meant having more than everyone else. A bigger house, a more expensive car, a higher net worth. But you've been rich all along, haven't you?" Emma smiled sadly. "Rich in love, maybe. But David, that doesn't pay the rent. Grace needs new shoes, and I've been putting it off for 2 months. Michael wants to take swimming lessons like his friend from daycare, but they cost $60 a month that I don't have. I work 50 hours a week, and some months I still have to choose between groceries and the electric bill." The words hit David like physical blows. His children were going without basic necessities while he owned 3 houses and a wine collection worth more than most people's annual salaries. "Let me help," David said urgently. "Let me give you money for no." Emma's voice was firm. "I won't take your guilt money, David. It's not guilt money. It's child support. It's my responsibility as their father. You gave up the right to claim that responsibility 2 years ago." Emma's eyes flashed with old anger. "You can't just walk back into our lives with your checkbook and expect everything to be forgiven." David felt his chest tighten. "Then what do you want from me, Emma? How do I make this right?" Emma was quiet for a long moment, staring into her teacup. When she finally looked up, her eyes were bright with unshed tears. "I want you to be their father, David. Not their benefactor, not their guilty conscience, their father. I want you to show up for them, consistently and completely. I want you to put them first, even when it's inconvenient for your business schedule. I want you to love them more than you love your quarterly projections." "I do love them more," David said desperately. "Emma, seeing them tonight, reading them that story, it was the first time I felt truly happy in 2 years. They're incredible, and I want to be part of their lives. I want to be the father they deserve. Do you?" Emma challenged. "Because being a father means more than reading bedtime stories when it's convenient. It means getting up at 3 in the morning when they have nightmares. It means missing important meetings when they have doctor's appointments. It means putting their needs before your own every single day. David thought about his father, who'd chosen his own ambitions over his family's needs. He thought about the promises he'd made to himself as a child, that he would never abandon his own children the way his father had abandoned him. "I know I don't deserve it," David said quietly, "but will you give me a chance to prove that I can be different? That I can be the father they need?" Emma studied his face for a long moment. "This isn't about me, David. This is about Michael and Grace. They're the ones who will get hurt if you decide being a father is too hard or too inconvenient." "I won't hurt them," David promised. "I swear to you, Emma, I won't walk away from them again." "You swore to love and honor me too," Emma pointed out, "in front of God and everyone we cared about. And when things got complicated, when I needed you most, you chose someone else." The words cut deep, but David didn't flinch from them. "You're right. I broke every promise I ever made to you. But Emma, I'm not the same man who walked away from you and the twins. Losing Victoria, seeing what my obsession with success has cost me, it's changed me. I want to be better. I want to be the man I should have been all along." Emma sighed, suddenly looking exhausted. "I'm tired, David. I'm tired of being angry, tired of raising these children alone, tired of wondering if you're ever going to care about them. But I'm also terrified. Because if I let you back into their lives and you hurt them, I won't," David said fiercely. "Emma, I've lost everything that matters. My marriage, my family, my sense of who I am. I can't lose them again. I won't survive it." Emma looked at him for a long moment, then nodded slowly. "1 month," she said. "You can see them every Saturday for 1 month. If you miss even one visit, if you cancel for a business meeting or show up late because of work, we're done. And if after a month you decide this is too hard or too complicated, you walk away forever. No more surprise visits, no more guilt-driven attempts at reconciliation. You choose now, David, them, or everything else." David felt his heart racing. 1 month to prove he could be the father his children needed. 1 month to rebuild trust that had been shattered by 2 years of abandonment. "I choose them," David said without hesitation. "I choose Michael and Grace. I choose being their father over everything else." Emma nodded. "We'll see." That night, David sat in his empty penthouse staring at his phone. He had 17 missed calls from board members, 43 unread emails about the Mumbai project, and a text from his assistant asking if he was planning to attend tomorrow's investor meeting. For the first time in his adult life, David didn't care. He poured himself a scotch, then set it down without taking a sip. He needed to be clear-headed, focused. He had work to do, not Richardson Industries work, but the most important work of his life. David opened his laptop and began typing. "To the board of directors of Richardson Industries, effective immediately, I am delegating day-to-day operations to our executive team while I take a personal leave of absence to address family matters. I will remain involved in major strategic decisions, but my priorities have shifted. I trust you will understand that some things are more important than quarterly earnings. David Richardson, CEO." David sent the email before he could second-guess himself. Within minutes, his phone was ringing, board members, investors, executives demanding explanations. David turned off his phone and went to bed, sleeping more peacefully than he had in months. The next morning, David did something he hadn't done in 15 years. He called in sick to work. Instead of attending the investor meeting, he drove to a toy store in Lakewood and spent 2 hours learning about age-appropriate toys for 2-year-olds. He bought Michael a set of wooden blocks and a picture book about construction trucks. For Grace, he found a doctor's kit and a stuffed elephant that reminded him of Emma's gentle nature. He also bought a children's bicycle, red with training wheels, and a bell on the handlebars. David's first official visit was that Saturday. He arrived at Emma's apartment at exactly 10 a.m. with the gifts and a nervous stomach. Michael and Grace were waiting by the window, pressing their faces against the glass to watch for him. "Daddy!" Michael shouted as David knocked on the door. "Daddy's here." Emma opened the door, and David saw something in her expression that gave him hope, not forgiveness, but maybe a softening around the edges. "Hi," David said simply. "Hi," Emma replied. "Come in. They've been asking about you all week." David spent the morning playing with blocks on the living room floor, building towers that Michael could knock down with gleeful abandon. Grace showed him how her stuffed animals needed checkups with her new doctor's kit, and David found himself playing patient while she listened to his heartbeat with her plastic stethoscope. "Your heart sounds happy," Grace announced after her examination. "It is happy," David told her, meaning every word. For lunch, they walked to a small park near Emma's apartment. David pushed both children on the swings, marveling at their laughter and the way Grace's hair caught the sunlight. When Michael fell and scraped his knee, David was the one who carried him to Emma for comfort, and he felt a surge of pride when his son reached for him instead of pulling away. At the end of the visit, David hugged both children goodbye, promising to see them the following Saturday. As he drove back to his empty penthouse, David realized that the 6 hours he'd spent with his children had been more fulfilling than any business deal he'd ever closed. The second Saturday was even better. David brought the bicycle, and they spent the afternoon in the park teaching Michael to ride. Grace cheered from the sidelines while Emma offered encouragement, and David ran alongside the bike, holding the seat steady. "Let go, Daddy," Michael called out. "I can do it myself." David released his grip and watched his son pedal away, wobbling but determined. When Michael made it all the way to the other end of the path, he turned around and rode back, his face glowing with pride and accomplishment. "Did you see me, Daddy? Did you see me ride my bike?" "I saw you, buddy," David said, scooping Michael up in a huge hug. "You were amazing." Over dinner at a family restaurant, nothing fancy, just a local place with crayons on the tables and a kid's menu, Grace climbed into David's lap and fell asleep against his chest. David sat perfectly still, afraid to wake her, overwhelmed by the trust she was showing him. "She likes you," Emma said softly, watching them. "I like her too," David replied. "I like both of them more than I ever thought possible." Emma smiled, the first real smile she'd given him since that day in the subway station. "They're pretty easy to love." The third Saturday brought unexpected challenges. Grace woke up with a fever and spent the day curled up on the couch, miserable and clingy. Instead of the planned trip to the zoo, David found himself reading stories and bringing her juice, learning the particular rhythm of caring for a sick child. "I want my mama," Grace whimpered when Emma stepped out to pick up medicine from the pharmacy. "Mama will be right back," David said, stroking her hair. "Can I take care of you until she gets home?" Grace nodded, then climbed into David's lap and fell asleep. David held her small, warm body against his chest, feeling her breathe, and understood something fundamental about parenthood that no business school had ever taught him. This was love in its purest form, selfless, unconditional, transformative. When Emma returned, she found David and Grace asleep together on the couch, Michael building a blanket fort around them to keep them safe. "How long have they been like that?" Emma whispered. "About an hour," Michael reported importantly. Grace had bad dreams, but Daddy sang her a song and she felt better. Emma looked at David with something approaching wonder. The driven, ambitious man who had once seen children as distractions was now holding their feverish daughter like she was the most precious thing in the world. Maybe, Emma thought, people really could change. By the fourth Saturday, David had established a routine with the twins that felt natural and right. He picked them up at 9 a.m., spent the day engaged in whatever activities they chose, and had them back home by 6 p.m. for dinner and bedtime stories. But this Saturday was different. Emma met him at the door looking exhausted, still wearing her scrubs from a double shift at the hospital. "I'm sorry," she said, swaying slightly on her feet. "I just got home 20 minutes ago. Mrs. Patterson had to leave early for a family emergency, and I couldn't find anyone else to watch them." David immediately stepped forward, gently taking her arm. "Emma, you're dead on your feet. When's the last time you slept?" "I don't know. Thursday, maybe." Emma rubbed her eyes. "We had 3 emergency surgeries come in back to back, and then we were short-staffed for the night shift. Daddy." Michael and Grace came running from their bedroom, still in their pajamas. They launched themselves at David, who caught them both in a huge hug. "Hey guys, Mama's really tired today. What do you say we let her take a nap while we have our adventure? Can we make pancakes?" Grace asked hopefully. "Can we build the biggest fort ever?" Michael added. David looked at Emma, who was barely standing upright. "Go to bed," he said gently. "I've got them. But you don't know their routine, then they can teach me. Right, guys?" Emma hesitated, and David could see the internal struggle on her face. She'd been doing everything alone for so long that trusting someone else felt impossible. "I won't let anything happen to them," David said quietly. "I promise." Emma nodded slowly, then knelt down to hug the twins. "Be good for Daddy, okay? I'm going to take a little nap." "We will, Mama," Grace said solemnly. "Daddy will take care of us." As Emma headed to her bedroom, David found himself alone with his children for the first time. The weight of that responsibility was both terrifying and exhilarating. "Okay, team," David said, clapping his hands together. "First things first, let's get you guys dressed and fed. Then we'll make this the best Saturday ever." The next few hours taught David more about parenthood than any book ever could. He learned that 2-year-olds have very specific opinions about everything, from which shirt to wear to how much syrup goes on pancakes. He discovered that building a fort requires precise engineering, according to Michael, and must include a medical station, according to Grace. He also learned that his children were remarkable little people with distinct personalities and quirks that amazed him. Michael was methodical and thoughtful, carefully planning each step of their fort construction. Grace was intuitive and nurturing, making sure everyone felt included and comfortable. "Daddy," Grace said during lunch, "why does Mama work so much?" The question caught David off guard. "Well, sweetheart, Mama works at the hospital to help sick people feel better. But why doesn't she just stay home with us like Mrs. Patterson's daughter does?" David felt his chest tighten. How could he explain that Emma worked 50-hour weeks because he'd left her with no choice? That she was a single mother trying to support 2 children on a nurse's salary while he lived in luxury? "Sometimes grown-ups have to work to make sure their families have everything they need," David said carefully. "Like food and a house and clothes." "Do you work?" Michael asked. "Yes, I do." "Do you help people feel better like Mama does?" David paused, thinking about Richardson Industries and its profit margins and market shares. "No, buddy, I don't help people the way Mama does." At 3 o'clock, David checked on Emma. She was sleeping so deeply that she didn't stir when he opened the door. She looked younger in sleep, her face relaxed and peaceful. But David could see the exhaustion etched in the lines around her eyes, the toll that years of working double shifts and raising twins alone had taken. He made a decision that would have shocked his board of directors. David pulled out his phone and called his personal banker. "Mr. Richardson, how can I help you today?" "I need to set up a trust fund," David said quietly, stepping into Emma's small kitchen so the twins wouldn't overhear. "2 accounts, actually. And I need it done today." "Of course, sir. What amounts are we talking about?" $5 million each for Michael and Grace Richardson. "And I want to set up automatic monthly payments to Emma Richardson, enough to cover all living expenses, with additional funds for education, extracurricular activities, and emergencies." There was a pause. "That's quite generous, sir." "May I ask? They're my children," David said firmly. "This is what I should have done 2 years ago." When Emma woke up 3 hours later, she found David and the twins in the living room. They had built an elaborate fort that took up most of the space, complete with multiple rooms and a flag made from one of Grace's drawings. All 3 of them were inside the fort, and David was reading a story with different voices for each character. And then the little bear said, David caught sight of Emma standing in the doorway and smiled. "Hey, Sleeping Beauty. Feel better." "I feel human again," Emma admitted, stretching. "How long was I out?" "About 3 hours." "We've been busy, haven't we, guys? Daddy helped us make the best fort in the whole world," Grace announced. "And he makes really good funny voices. And he knows how to make grilled cheese with the crusts cut off just right," Michael added importantly. Emma looked around at her transformed living room, then at David's rumpled shirt and hair that was sticking up from crawling around the fort. This was a man who usually wore $1,000 suits and commanded boardrooms, now sitting on her apartment floor, making silly voices for a children's book. "Thank you," Emma said softly. "For what?" "For taking care of them. For letting me sleep. For—" she gestured at the fort, at the happy faces of their children. "For this." David felt something shift in his chest. This was what he'd been searching for his entire life, not the approval of board members or the admiration of competitors, but this simple, profound connection with the people he loved most. The 5th Saturday started like all the others, but it became the day that changed everything. David arrived at Emma's apartment to find her pacing the living room with her phone pressed to her ear, the twins sitting on the couch looking worried. "I understand it's short notice," Emma was saying, "but I can't leave them alone. Isn't there anyone else who can cover the shift?" David quickly gathered from the conversation that the hospital had called Emma in for an emergency surgery, a multi-car accident with several critical patients. The twins' usual babysitter was out of town, and Emma couldn't find anyone else. "I'll stay with them," David said immediately. Emma looked up, surprised. "David, you don't understand. This could be 8 to 10 hours. Maybe longer if complications arise." "I understand perfectly. These are my children, Emma. Let me take care of them." Emma hesitated, phone still in her hand. "But you've never watched them for that long. What if something happens? What if they get sick or hurt or—" "Then I'll handle it," David said firmly. "Emma, you save lives. Go save more. We'll be fine." 20 minutes later, Emma was gone, and David was alone with the twins for what would be the longest and most important day of his life as a father. The first few hours went smoothly. They played games, read stories, and had lunch. But around 3 p.m., Grace started acting differently. She was clingy and whiny, refusing to eat her snack and complaining that her tummy hurt. Maybe she just needs a nap, David thought, but when he picked her up, he was alarmed by how warm she felt. Grace had a fever. David's first instinct was to panic. He'd read about fevers in children, knew they could be serious. But as Grace curled against his chest, trusting him to make her feel better, David forced himself to stay calm. He called Emma's cell phone, but it went straight to voicemail. She was in surgery, unreachable. "Okay, Grace," David said softly. "Let's get you feeling better." The next few hours tested every parenting instinct David didn't know he had. He gave Grace children's Tylenol, after carefully reading the dosage instructions 3 times, kept her hydrated with small sips of water, and held her while she dozed fitfully against his chest. Michael, sensing something was wrong with his sister, stayed close by, bringing his favorite stuffed bear to help Grace feel better and speaking in whispers so he wouldn't wake her. "Is Gracie going to be okay?" Michael asked, his dark eyes wide with worry. "She's going to be fine," David assured him, though privately he was watching Grace's every breath. Sometimes little girls and boys get fevers when their bodies are fighting off germs. The medicine will help her feel better. As evening approached, Grace's fever finally broke. She woke up in David's arms, looked around with clear eyes, and announced that she was hungry. David had never felt such relief in his life. When Emma finally came home at 11 p.m., exhausted but successful in saving 2 lives, she found David asleep on the couch with both children cuddled against him. Grace was fever-free and peaceful, Michael's arm protectively wrapped around his sister. Emma stood in her doorway, watching the 3 most important people in her world, and felt something she hadn't experienced in 2 years, complete trust. David had passed the ultimate test. When Grace needed him, he'd been there. When Michael was scared, David had comforted him. He hadn't called for backup or demanded Emma come home. He'd simply been their father. The final Saturday of their 1-month trial arrived with unexpected news. Emma met David at the door with an envelope in her hands and an expression he couldn't read. "We need to talk," she said. David's heart sank. Was this it? Had he failed some test he didn't know he was taking? "Daddy." Michael and Grace came running, but Emma gently redirected them. "Why don't you 2 play in your room for a few minutes while Daddy and I talk?" Once the children were occupied, Emma handed David the envelope. "This came yesterday." David opened it with trembling hands. Inside was a job offer from Seattle Children's Hospital, a prestigious position as head of pediatric nursing, with a salary nearly double what Emma was making in Cleveland. "It's an incredible opportunity," Emma said quietly. "The kind of position I've dreamed about since nursing school." David felt the world tilt beneath his feet. "Are you going to take it?" "I don't know." Emma sat down heavily on her couch. 2 months ago, I would have accepted immediately. Better pay, better opportunities, a chance to really make a difference. But now I have to think about them. Emma gestured toward the children's bedroom. "They just found their father, David. And despite everything that happened between us, I can see how much they love you, how much you love them." David's throat felt tight. "What are you saying?" "I'm saying that maybe it's time for us to figure out what comes next. Not as husband and wife, that ship has sailed, but as parents, as a family." David stared at the job offer, his mind racing. Seattle was 2,400 miles away. If Emma took this job, he might see his children a few times a year at best. He'd go back to being a weekend father, or worse. There's something else, Emma said, pulling a bank statement from her purse. Someone has been making deposits into my account. Large deposits. Monthly amounts that cover all our expenses and more. David's face flushed. He'd hoped the trust fund payments would be anonymous, routed through lawyers and banks so Emma wouldn't know they came from him. I know it's you, David, Emma said softly. The amounts are too specific, too perfectly calculated to our needs. You've been taking care of us financially, haven't you? David nodded, unable to speak. Why didn't you tell me? Because you said you didn't want guilt money, David replied. But this isn't guilt money, Emma. This is my responsibility. These are my children, and I should have been supporting them from the beginning. Emma was quiet for a long moment. The money isn't why I'm reconsidering Seattle. It's not. No. It's because of last Saturday when Grace was sick. It's because I came home to find you asleep on my couch with both children in your arms, and I realized that for the first time in 2 years, I wasn't carrying the weight of parenthood alone. Emma stood up and walked to the window, looking out at the playground where they'd spent so many Saturday afternoons. I've been angry at you for so long, David. Angry about the divorce, about you choosing Victoria, about you walking away from the twins. But watching you these past few weeks, I think I'm finally ready to let go of that anger. Emma, let me finish. She turned back to face him. I don't forgive you. Not yet. What you did to me, to us, to these children, that's going to take time to work through. But I'm willing to try. For their sake, and maybe for ours too. David felt hope bloom in his chest. What does that mean? It means I'm not taking the Seattle job. It means we're going to figure out how to co-parent these children properly. And it means... Emma took a deep breath. It means I think you should move closer. Not back into our lives romantically. I'm not ready for that, and I don't know if I ever will be. But closer geographically. Close enough to be the hands-on father you've proven you can be. I'll do anything, David said immediately. I'll move to Lakewood. I'll buy a house down the street. David. Emma's voice was gentle but firm. Slow down. This isn't about grand gestures or expensive solutions. This is about showing up, day after day, for the small moments and the big ones. Can you do that? David thought about Richardson Industries, about the penthouse downtown, about the empire he'd built that suddenly felt insignificant compared to 2 small children who called him daddy. Yes, he said without hesitation. I can do that. 6 months later, David Richardson stood in the backyard of his modest 3-bedroom house in Lakewood, watching Michael and Grace play on their swing set. It was a far cry from his former estate in Hudson, but it was exactly where he belonged. The house was a 10-minute walk from Emma's apartment, close enough for the children to bike between houses, but far enough to give everyone space to adjust to their new reality. David had bought it with cash and spent weeks learning how to install child safety locks, set up bunk beds, and create spaces where his children would feel comfortable and loved. Richardson Industries still existed, still turned profits, but David had stepped back from day-to-day operations completely. He maintained his role as CEO in name only, letting his executive team handle the details while he focused on the most important job of his life, being a father. Daddy, watch this. Grace called out, pumping her legs to make her swing go higher. I'm watching, sweetheart, David called back, marveling at how naturally the words came now. His phone buzzed. A text from Emma. Emergency surgery came up. Can you get them from daycare today? Of course, David texted back. Take your time. We'll have dinner ready when you get home. This was their life now. Not perfect, not without challenges, but real in a way that David's previous existence had never been. Emma worked her shifts at the hospital. David handled school pickups and doctor appointments and the 1,000 small tasks that came with raising 2 active toddlers. They shared holidays and birthday parties, soccer practices, and parent-teacher conferences. They weren't a traditional family, but they were a family nonetheless. The hardest part hadn't been learning to change diapers or give baths or negotiate bedtime routines. The hardest part had been earning back Emma's trust. Not as a husband, that relationship was over, buried with the pain of betrayal and divorce. But as a co-parent, as someone she could depend on to put their children first. It had taken months of consistent behavior, of showing up every single time he promised to, of choosing Michael and Grace over every business opportunity that arose. Slowly, gradually, Emma began to believe that this version of David was real. "The money isn't why I'm staying," Emma had told him during one of their weekly check-ins. "I want you to understand that. I could take that Seattle job tomorrow and we'd be fine financially." "I know," David had replied. "You're staying because you believe I've changed. Because you think I can be the father they need." "No," Emma had corrected him. "I'm staying because you've already proven you can be the father they need. The question now is whether you can sustain it." David was determined to prove that he could. He'd sold the penthouse, the yacht, 2 of his 3 houses. He'd liquidated most of his stock portfolio to fund the children's trust funds and Emma's financial security. He drove a practical SUV instead of a sports car, shopped at Target instead of boutique stores, and found that he was happier than he'd ever been. "Daddy." Michael came running over, his face flushed from playing. "Mama's home." David looked up to see Emma walking through the backyard gate, still in her scrubs, but smiling as Grace launched herself from the swing into her arms. "How were they?" Emma asked, accepting hugs from both children. "Perfect, as always," David replied. "Grace helped me make spaghetti, and Michael set the table all by himself. I used the special placemats," Michael announced proudly. As they headed inside for dinner, David caught Emma's eye over the children's heads. She smiled at him, not the guarded, careful smile of early coexistence, but something warmer. Something that acknowledged the family they'd built together, unconventional as it was. Later, after the children were in bed and Emma had headed back to her apartment, David sat on his porch with a cup of coffee, thinking about the journey that had brought him here. He'd lost a marriage, a fortune, and the respect of the business community. But he'd gained something infinitely more valuable, the love of his children and the knowledge that he was finally the man he'd always wanted to be. His phone rang, interrupting his thoughts. The caller ID showed a number he didn't recognize. "Hello, David Richardson? This is Victoria Chun." His ex-wife's voice was hesitant, uncertain. "I hope you don't mind me calling." David's chest tightened. He hadn't spoken to Victoria since their divorce was finalized. "What can I do for you, Victoria? I heard about what you've been doing. The house in Lakewood, stepping back from the company to be with your children. I wanted to. I owe you an apology. You don't owe me anything." "Yes, I do." Victoria's voice was thick with emotion. "I was wrong about you, David. When I left, I thought you were incapable of change. I thought you'd always choose business over family. But you proved me wrong." David was quiet for a moment, watching fireflies dance in his modest backyard. "I proved myself wrong too. Are you happy?" Victoria asked. David thought about Grace's laughter, about Michael's determination to ride his bike without training wheels, about Emma's tentative trust in the family they were slowly building together. "Yes," he said simply. "I'm happy." After hanging up, David remained on his porch until the stars came out. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, a soccer game to attend, a grocery run with 2 opinionated toddlers, perhaps a family dinner if Emma wasn't working late. Simple tasks that would have bored him senseless 3 years ago, but now filled him with purpose. He'd spent 15 years building Richardson Industries, creating an empire that impressed investors and competitors alike. But his greatest achievement would always be much smaller and infinitely more precious, earning the right to be called daddy by 2 remarkable children who deserved nothing less than his whole heart. 2 years later, David Richardson stood in the same subway station where his life had changed forever. This time, he wasn't seeking shelter from a storm. This time, he was there by choice, with Michael and Grace holding his hands as they waited for Emma to finish her shift at the hospital. "This is where I met Daddy again," Michael announced to his little sister, though Grace had heard this story many times before. "You were so little then," Grace said seriously, though she was only 4 now and remembered almost nothing of that day. David smiled, remembering his shock at seeing his own eyes reflected in Michael's face, the way his world had tilted on its axis when Grace asked if he loved them. That moment had been the beginning of his real life, not the hollow success he'd mistaken for happiness, but the messy, beautiful reality of family. The train arrived, and David lifted both children onto his shoulders, making them squeal with delight. As they rode toward home, David reflected on how much had changed. Richardson Industries was still successful, now run entirely by his executive team, while David collected dividends that funded his family's comfortable but modest lifestyle. He'd discovered that he needed far less money than he'd ever imagined to be happy. Emma had been promoted to head of pediatric nursing at Cleveland General, a position that challenged her professionally while keeping reasonable hours. They'd never remarried. That chapter of their lives was closed forever, but they'd built something better, a partnership based on mutual respect and shared love for their children. The twins were thriving. Michael, now 4, was reading at a first-grade level and had already announced his intention to become an engineer, like Daddy used to be. Grace was the nurturer of the family, always checking to make sure everyone was happy and healthy. They split their time between David's house and Emma's apartment, secure in the knowledge that both parents loved them unconditionally. "Daddy," Grace said as they got off the train, "are you happy?" It was such a simple question, the same one Victoria had asked him 2 years ago. But the answer came without hesitation. "I'm the happiest man in the world, sweetheart." "Happier than when you had your big building?" Michael asked. David thought about the Richardson Industries tower, still standing but no longer carrying his personal ambitions. "Much happier." "Why?" "Because I have you and Grace and Mama. And that's all I ever really needed." As they walked home through the streets of Lakewood, David realized that he'd finally learned the lesson it had taken him 40 years to understand. Success wasn't measured in stock prices or square footage or quarterly reports. Success was measured in bedtime stories and scraped knees kissed better, in trust earned back one day at a time, in the simple joy of being exactly where you belonged. He'd built an empire and lost it all, only to discover that his greatest fortune had been waiting for him in a cramped subway station, in the form of 2 small children who just wanted their daddy to come home. And he had. Finally, completely, David Richardson had come home. Friends, if this story has touched your heart the way it's touched mine, please take a moment to hit that like button and share it with someone who needs to hear about second chances and the power of choosing love over success. In our world of endless ambition and material pursuits, it's easy to lose sight of what truly matters. David Richardson had everything the world says we should want: wealth, power, recognition. But he was empty inside until he learned that the most valuable currency isn't money. It's time. Time spent with the people we love, time invested in relationships that matter, time dedicated to being present for the moments that make life meaningful. Remember that it's never too late to change course. It's never too late to choose love over ambition, family over fortune, presence over prestige. The greatest legacy we can leave isn't measured in dollars or achievements. It's measured in the lives we touch and the love we share. Until next time, this is Mr. Wentworth reminding you that every ending can be a new beginning, and every heart can find its way home. God bless you all, and thank you for being part of our Lux Love Chronicles family. Don't forget to subscribe and ring that notification bell so you never miss a story of love, redemption, and the triumph of the human spirit.